This is the INKPULP Podcast. This is the INKPULP Podcast. Comics, hip hop, life.
Welcome to the INKPULP Podcast. I'm your host, Shawn Crystal, and I've got another drawing lesson for you today. I think more and more this podcast is going to be focused on giving you some tips and tricks and maybe talk about some tools, all art supply related, all art related, all goodness, all day here on the INKPULP Podcast. So today's little lesson, and this is just going to be a quick in and out type lesson, unlike the heads, which was 3 parts. Today's lesson is in composition, not in general. I'm going to talk about one thing in particular, the rule of thirds. But let's back up. All right. Composition, designing your image, is, well, for me, one of the most exciting aspects of creating art. And one of the most exciting aspects when viewing art. A great composition just nails me. I mean, if it's successful, it's leading the reader or the viewer's eye to the correct focal point. Now let's talk about that word, focal point. The first thing you have to understand in any image you're going to create is the focal point. What's the purpose of this image? Where do you want the eye to settle as a primary focus? We can have secondary and tertiary focuses, foci. I don't know. We can have more than one, but it's got to be a hierarchy. The dominant one is the one you need to really pay attention to, and you can use the other elements to lead your eye to that one. That's another lesson for another day. Today we're talking about the rule of thirds. So it's important to understand the purpose of your image and lead the reader's eye to that. And that's what composition is really all about. I say reader because I'm thinking about comic books, but if you're thinking about illustration or painting, viewer, whatever. Photography, same thing. Just like a movie with great cinematography is exciting to me, seeing a nice composition. It's the same thing. And I do study cinematography to help me and my compositions get better, but I don't study cinematography alone. I do look at art as well. So the first thing you have to understand is your focal point. Second thing you have to understand is your image area. And that's really important to understand. It defines the image. So let's look at that. So let's say I have a panel or an illustration or a painting, and this is my image area. Another example of an image area is, let's say we have a panel or a painting that's this shape in size. Okay? Those are your image areas. And we have to understand those dimensions or that space in order to understand how to put the eye in the rule of thirds area. So every different image size will create a different rule of thirds kind of sweet spot zone. So let's take this image. So the rule of thirds is pretty simple to create. And what it says is if you divide your image area into thirds horizontally and thirds vertically, all of the intersecting points are great areas for your focal point. So let's explain that. So if I'm dividing this horizontally into thirds, 1, 2, 3 across, horizontal. And it doesn't, you don't have to measure it out and make it precise. I mean, it's not going to hurt to do that, but this is art. I try to make my art as involving as little math as possible. I've studied the math. I've done the math. I've spent countless hours measuring and making things perfect, and I learned a lot from doing that and came out the other side ready to let go of a lot of it. But I think it's important to go through with it to learn it. So then we do it, divide it into thirds. Well, I guess this is more horizontal, the other one's vertical. We're using vertical lines here, horizontal lines there. So there's our image area, and there's our rule of thirds broken down. And what the rule of thirds states is, watch this. Every intersecting point is a great spot for your focus, or your focal point of your image. Now, let's look at this. Now, what this does is it creates an area of interest around the center. And you might be thinking, well, why don't I just put it in the center? Okay, so for example, if you had an image area, and if you ever want to know a quick way to find the center of any image area, connect the corners that are opposing each other and where they meet is the middle. So if I put my focal point right there in the middle, it works. Center compositions work. And the reason we use the rule of thirds to get away from that is because centered compositions are predictable. Often thought of as dull and boring and predictable. That being said, there are some artists who use that centered composition and symmetry and embrace it and celebrate it and make it incredible. One of my favorite directors, Wes Anderson, the cinematography, he's always going with his centered composition and symmetry. And he celebrates it with such passion that the imagery is just gorgeous. And Stanley Kubrick, another director, did the same sort of thing. But let's break away from that and try new things. So the rule of thirds states that any one of these intersecting points is a great place for a focal point. And what that does is it says, hey, it's not the predictable area you thought it was. It's something a little different. So there, you want to consider some things like, do I want to lead the reader across the image at first? And put my subject matter here, my focal point there. Do I want to put it over here? I mean, you choose, play with it. If there's one thing I would say when it comes to art, when it comes to composition, when it comes to everything, is play, push. Don't always do what's safe. In fact, more often than not, don't be safe. Just experiment and get to know it. And so that's the rule of thirds as applied to there. Now, let's look at this panel, which is a little different. And there's your rule of thirds. Here, 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 here. Also, what the rule of thirds does is it prevents you from getting too close to the borders of the image area, which you don't really want to have a composition where like your focal point is right on the image area. Hi, like that. It makes the viewer very aware of the space in which they are viewing the image. It flattens it out and it makes them very aware of the edges of it. And you're a great illustrator, artist, cartoonist, or whatever, invites you into the image and makes you forget that you're kind of trapped in that image area. So here's another one, another focal point around here. Let's say we just wanted the moon against the cityscape. Okay, we could just place the moon up there, and we've got a nice little interesting composition. Pretty simple. This is really graphic design stuff. I mean, I love thumbnailing for this reason. It's not about drawing chops, it's about designing chops. Now, something to think about as we move forward. Once you've done that, what other elements can you use to lead your eye? Like if this is my focal point, how can I pull an eye into here? And it could be, let's say there's a staircase behind him. as this character's walking by. All right, so it pulls your eye diagonally down, and it repeats a pattern of an image, almost like a rhythm in a song. 1, 2, 3, 4. It breaks it, and there's your focal point. So there's different things you can do to lead the eye. For example, here, like we want to pull the eye into here. We could have you could have clouds kind of leading to it. Anything you can do. I mean, sometimes it just helps to put arrows in and say, all right, what could be those arrows? And it could be a bunch of, just be creative. It could be anything, really. It could be clouds. It could be anything. Anyways, so that's the idea of the rule of thirds. So play with it. Let me know in the comments below if this was helpful to you. I use this like every time I compose a new painting or a panel or a page or whatever. I'm constantly pushing myself and testing my knowledge of composition. To me, it's one of the most exciting and interesting aspects of art. And a lot of artists who I love, their compositions are just really stellar and solid. I hope this helps you. And if so, I hope you'll check out INKPULPinstruction.com. That is my website for my business that teaches the art of comic book making. I've got, by the time this comes out, there should be a good 6-7 episodes out. 2021 was our first year. 2022, we're going to ramp it up. We're going to release 20 episodes next year. And there's stuff coming. Like a subscription service, and we're just working on it. I'm building it, and it's not just me teaching on there. I've got the best of the best, the cream of the crop comic book artists coming in, and I'm offering episodes of their teachings as well.
This is the INKPULP Podcast. This is the INKPULP Podcast. Comics, hip hop, life.